Recording.
We are recording, so we can continue now. Thank you. Welcome. Apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Wilson, Councillor Baines and Councillor Boole and Peter French, the Education Representative.
Thank you. As far as the councillors are concerned, we are quite a large committee compared with some of the other committees on this council. And because our political balance is as it is now, and none of the groups have got what I might call spare people, it's actually quite difficult to find substitutes certainly for the Conservative and the Independent and Green group, possibly not so much for the Liberal Democrats. So that is why we don't have substitutes this evening. We were due to have a substitute for Councillor Wilson, but unfortunately his substitute can't be with us for health reasons. So this, just to inform you and update you all. All right, records of meetings. We have two to confirm as a correct record. The first is the meeting that was held on the, I was going to say 13th of October. I might not be in the right order there. We do have to. The 5th of October. Yeah, I thought that didn't sound right. And the second is the 13th of October. For the 5th of October, do we have a proposer for that? Thank you, Mr. Peggy. And a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Brown. All those who were present, who can vote in favour of approving those minutes?
Minutes have been approved, Chair.
Thank you. And for the 13th of October, proposer, thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Peggy. All those in favour?
Thank you, Chair. Those minutes have been approved as well.
Thank you. Actions arising from the minutes, which isn't easy when you've got two. We did look at the actions from the meeting of the 5th at the meeting on the 13th. So I think, in fact, most of the actions of the 13th are appearing on the agenda tonight. The only one that isn't was the under the access to dental services. We were, as a committee, going to write to the Secretary of State for Health. That hasn't happened because I had assumed, as in keeping with past practice, that governance would draft the letter for me to send after I'd sent through the points that I thought we wanted to include. And it transpired that governance no longer provide this service and I will have to draft it. I am not very good at drafting letters. It is taking me rather a long time to get it into words that are both clear and polite. It will happen, and I assure you, committee, that before it is sent, you will all have a chance to comment on the letter, because I am certain that you will be able to improve on what I write. Thank you. And the second thing, sorry, there were two things, weren't there? NHS England were going to provide us with some information pertaining to dental decay, etc. Have they provided anything?
Nothing as yet, Chair. I have chased them twice. I will continue to chase them until we get the information we have requested.
Thank you very much. I think we will all be in agreement that it really isn't satisfactory that Rutland isn't being provided with information from NHS England. Anyway, we move on. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No? No. Have we had any petitions, deputations or questions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Have we had any questions with notice from members?
No questions received, Chair.
Any notices of motion from members?
No notices received, Chair.
And have we had any call-ins?
No call-ins received, Chair.
Fine, thank you. So we move on to the mid-year finance update. We have all had access to the report that went to Cabinet. We have obviously discussed Finance in Council relatively recently, but tonight we're going to have an update from Sav and from Councillor Karen Payne. So can I hand over to whomever of you is kicking off, please?
Thank you, Chair. Sav, do you have a presentation that you want to share, or do you want me to launch into a presentation?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Through you, I do have a presentation that I'd like to do tonight, which updates on the latest position on the MTFP and gives some of the headlines that will affect us from the Chancellor's autumn statement today. Before I get into that, I wasn't intending to talk to the two reports that the committee has received, but Councillor Payne and I are happy to deal with any questions that the committee may have relating to those two reports, and we can do that before my presentation or after. I would leave that with you to determine what's appropriate.
Thank you. When committee were discussing how we wanted to approach this, I think we were all seeing the report, the finance report that went to Cabinet as a background information for us, and were looking forward to hearing what you had to say, unless anybody does want to ask any questions. I think that was what, Councillor Tersland.
If it's okay, Chair, it's not for you. Karen, I just wanted to raise the point that I actually found it quite difficult to go through the documents for tonight's meeting, because instead of being on the agenda, you had to go through other agendas to get to them, and it made it quite time consuming and confusing for myself. As you all know, I have ADHD, and I know this probably seems quite trivial, but it really is little things like that that do make a massive difference. So in future, would it be possible to ensure that they are included with the agenda papers?
Thank you. I think it's actually a very valid point, because there is a second issue to that, and that is members during committee frequently refer to page number, but you can't refer to page numbers if one lot of reports is from one set of papers and another lot from somewhere else. And I too found it extraordinarily difficult to work out where we were. And I don't have ADHD, but I am dyspraxic. So there are a range of needs in this committee. Councillor Brown, are you wishing to come in on that?
Just to reiterate what Councillor Toseland said, I mean, can the pack be paginated starting at number 1 and then continuing through? So we're not saying it's on page 59 of said report, it is on page 150 of the pack, rather than having, you know, going from 1 to whatever several times. Just go from 1 to the end.
Thank you. Well, that's half of those of us who are here are asking for the same thing. So I think I make that as a formal request, Chief Executive.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Sav, to cut you off in your prime.
That's all right, Chair. Logistics. I was intending to stand up to do my presentation. Now, I'm going to ask Jane whether that presents a problem in terms of the recording, even though I won't be speaking into a microphone.
Yes, it will. You need to speak into the microphone, otherwise there'll be no recording. People will be able to see you stand up and walk and talk, your mouth open.
I will sit here and do it then. So would you mind passing me the clicker?
We haven't got a clicker.
So you're going to click for me. Okay. Right, okay. Jane, if you would.
Yeah.
Thank you. We can proceed. We're all learning, aren't we? Yeah, so what I wanted to cover tonight is just give an update really on the sorts of pressures that we are seeing. And I hope members will be aware of some of these anyway, because they are referred to in the mid-year reports. So some of what I tell you shouldn't be a surprise. We are presently updating the MTFP for pressures and for some other factors as well, and I'll shine a light on what some of those things are. Clearly there are risks and issues that we face, and we'll have a chat about those. What scenario might we face at budget setting and beyond? Well, I think the autumn statement was quite useful today and helpful in helping us sort of get an idea of where we might be. And then, so we'll finish off and talk about the autumn statement at the end, as far as we can. So Jane, if you don't mind. So as members saw in the financial sustainability strategy that was presented to council at that time, the gap in our medium-term financial plan is around 2.8 million. But we all know there are lots of assumptions in there that involve some guesswork, some educated guesswork, and some little bit of finger in the air and crystal ball gazing. I had resisted updating the MTFP because for a while, because every time I do, I end up updating it about a few days later. With the nature of the world that we're living in is, and certainly the nature of what's happening politically at central government level, meant that sort of things were changing very quickly, that meant assumptions would change quickly. So I took the decision that it'd be better to perhaps update the MTFP a little less frequently and be a bit more efficient about that. So I had deferred updating it, but now as we head into budget setting, I am starting to look at that and update some of the assumptions. And one of the key things that we have been working on and looking at is the adult social care reforms. And I wasn't looking forward to the challenge of budgeting for the unknown, but the government appeared today to have relieved me of that particular pressure, as the reforms have been deferred until October 25. And I think members will have seen that today. So not gone away forever yet, but certainly gone for 2 years. Jane, thank you. So in terms of what's been happening recently that has an impact on us, well, I'll take the second one first, really. The pay award was settled for 22-23. We had originally budgeted for 4% for the pay award, which members will know we usually do 2%, but in light of inflation and everything else, we'd budgeted for 4%. The actual end impact was about 6.4% when you include national insurance and pension within it. So that effectively costs us an additional £321,000 in this year, but obviously we see that increased cost forever because people's pay doesn't go down. So in effect, next year's budget will have a hit of £321,000. We then have a decision to make, and I'd be very interested in members' views on this, about what do we do for our pay award for 23-24. We normally do 2%, as I mentioned earlier. We've seen today the government have referenced a further increase in the national living wage. I think members will no doubt have seen that. That suggests to me that I don't feel that comfortable with budgeting for 2% for next year. So my initial view was to increase that to 4%. And that, of course, has a further impact on the MTFP for next year. But as I said, I'd be very interested for members to note whether they think I should stick with the 2 or go to 4, whether, no, we think we're okay with 4, we think? Yeah, Councillor Beggy's nodding his head. That's good enough for me, I think. So yes, but pay clearly is going to be a pressure. Members know that we normally do 2%. The council tax base is quite an interesting one. We normally get an increase in our tax base, and so everybody's on the same page. The tax base is effectively the number of Band D equivalents we've got in Rutland, number of Band D equivalents, and that tends to run around 15,800, something like that. And what? No, it's not as much as that actually. Don't quote me on that, but it is no, I think it's about 13,000 actually. I should probably know that. But normally what happens is as houses get built, then clearly the tax base grows. But what's happened in our case is that we seem to be getting a number of empty properties that effectively dampen the tax base because you don't collect council tax from an empty property, or not all of them anyway. So that has had the effect of dampening our growth in the tax base, which is not a trend we've had previously. Government funding, we'll talk about that a bit later on, but in advance of today, I'd made no assumptions really that we'd get more or less funding. Business rates, again, no update as of yet. Some announcements have been made around business rates today, but we need to work through what they might mean for us. Investment income really has gone through the roof in light of what's happening in our economy and interest rates going up pretty sharply. I think Andrew will correct me if I'm wrong. When we originally set the budget and we're looking at treasury management, I think interest was about 0.7, weren't they? 0.7, 0.8%. And then, of course, we are where we are today. And unfortunately, we'd taken the strategy of investing over a short period of time. So we invest for a short period of time, which has meant that when investments have matured, we've been able to then reinvest them and take advantage of the increased rates that we're seeing in the market. So that is the most positive news in all of what I'll show you tonight, that we are expecting next year to increase investment income by about 1.4 million, and it will continue into the year after, Andrew, but then tails off when we get inflation back at 2% eventually, if we ever do. Pension fund rates were increased in the outturn report, but the rates had gone up. We were Leicestershire County Council are our pension fund administrators, and we had been notified at the back end of the financial year that the rate would increase from 26.7% to 27.8%. So that is effectively a premium that we pay on top of people's salaries, and that is fixed for 3 years. Jay, do you mind? Thank you. Oh.
Was that an extra one?
No. Have you gone backwards?
Story of my life.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, we as everybody knows, we have to have an internal audit service, and the procurement is for most, I think about 99% of local authorities opt into a national procurement process, and that has delivered results that we're not that happy with, in that the market for external audits really poor, and the fees, we've been notified that fees are going to increase by 150%. So yeah, it's an eye-watering figure, and our fee will go up from it's about 190 grand, isn't it? 100 grand, 100, just over 100. Will increase to over 260. It's not something we're very happy with. I'm hoping we might be recompensed a little for that in the settlement, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think that's extremely disappointing, but sign of the times, I'm afraid. Commission transport is always an area of pressure. I mean, a lot of this stems from the work we do and the increased demand we get for special educational needs, and members will know that some of the pressures we get, we obviously have to place people in the right place, and some of that might be out of county. So I think this, since I've been here, this number has just grown and grown, and it continues to do so. So based on the demand at the mid-year, we think next year's numbers, which we think is likely to increase, we think we're going to see a further pressure into next year. Utilities, I think there is a report coming to Cabinet. I think Penny is bringing his report to Cabinet on this. We had made some extra provision in the MTFP for utilities costs. I still think these numbers could be volatile, but they're not that certain. But we are, again, likely to see further pressures into next year. I'm not quite sure what support we get relative to householders, to be honest. Do we not? I'm not quite sure. I need to know.
I could make a wild guess.
No, okay. I don't think we get the same level of support, no. Yeah, we've updated the MTFP. We made some assumptions around the environment bill about charging for green waste, which apparently, well, not apparently, in the environment bill, you wouldn't be allowed to do. And of course, we do charge for green waste, but we think that will maybe deferred. So we've got, I think that's a positive, the 136, isn't it? Yeah. So that's a positive. That means we don't take the hit that we expected to take. Members will be aware that at the last council meeting, a paper was brought around extending the waste contract, and of course, that is something that members did agree, and we think that you know, we are likely to see a cost increase in that. I think there is a range. The report actually reported a range. We plumped for the middle of the range. Children's social care, as ever, is always under pressure. We had seen a reduction in need, but that has now started to creep up again. But as members will know, that goes up and down. We are in the budget hoping to, well, we will be bringing forward savings proposals of about £1.5 million. We're currently working through the detail of that. And of course, members will get the opportunity to scrutinise those in due course. And then adult social care, I will update a little bit more detail on this, Jane. And this was written, so it was the government's intention to fully fund the reforms. Now, members will be aware, and they've probably heard me say it at briefings and maybe heard John Morley say at briefings, that there's been a piece of work done nationally by a firm called Newton, who say that the government had significantly underestimated the cost of the reforms by about 10 billion. So a little bit out. Locally, we'd done some modelling ourselves, where we'd felt that the funding we'd get from government would be about £1 to £1.5 million against the cost that you see there, which is fair cost of care. Now, this is about local authorities who have market responsibilities in relation to the care market. This is about us paying a fair rate, a rate that allows providers to make a reasonable return, but also, you know, keep the market vibrant. Now, one of the things that's happening in our market is that the agreed rate that we normally pay, for example, for residential care is £580 a week. And a week, that's right, isn't it? I said a week there. I was going to check myself there. It's £580 a week. When the team are now commissioning beds, we're unable to secure bed rates of £580, and we're actually being forced to pay about £900 for beds. And the simple reason for that is that in our economy, we have a lot of people who self-fund, can pay for their own care, and those people clearly pay more significant rates than £580. So our suppliers in our market are not massively dependent on the local authority business at £580. So we find ourselves in an invidious position whereby we are paying a rate that's way above that we had been paying 6-12 months ago. And clearly, that is something that is going to be very difficult to reverse the trend of that based on where we're at. The reforms are also going to mean that we see new demand for care. As the means test changed, more people will come forward, and it mean that we would have to meet the costs of their care. As the text there says, that will now be deferred for 2 years. And of course, as you can imagine, given that the reforms were due to be implemented in October, we are knee deep in a project to implement these reforms. And we have got to take a decision very quickly about whether we continue some of that work or whether we defer it or pause it rather until nearer the time. But I think some of the work we've started, we are likely to continue. I'd like to believe that the reforms will go ahead in 2 years' time. Slightly nervous about that. So because of the funding issue that's referred to at the top of the slide. But we'll have to make a decision about whether we proceed or not. But as it stands today, work is deferred, the reforms are deferred, and we will have to decide how far we go with the work that we've got. But clearly, one of the challenges we're going to have in the budget is how do we estimate what the costs of implementing the care cap would be when we simply don't know how many people might present themselves and ask us to look after them and fund their care. Jane. So where are we in terms of the MTFP emerging scenario? So as you can see from the update I've given, some things have gone against us from a financial point of view. A variety of service pressures, the pay award that we hadn't fully provisioned for. Some things have gone for us. Investment income, that's the main one, and that is a very big number. Still massive amounts of uncertainty, and the settlement that we're going to get in December, has never been more critical, I would say. Now, a poor settlement, so one where we didn't really, obviously we've been through a period where everything we seem to do as a council is now costing us more, whether that's care, whether it's we go out and procure or renew contracts, everything's costing us more, including employing our own staff. So a poor settlement, one where the cost of living increases and the challenges of inflation are not recognised, I believe would have every unitary council reassessing and questioning whether they are viable, because the pressures on us, and you've seen the figures in what we've talked about, the increases in costs are not insignificant. So I think every authority, if the settlement doesn't reflect some acknowledgement for inflation and other factors, I think every council would be looking at themselves and thinking, blimey, can we survive in the medium term here? And in particular, a settlement which gives councils more funding, but asks you as members locally to make decisions around council tax that would give us that more funding, puts massive pressure on the decisions that we make locally. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, because a little bit of that has happened today, I think. So in terms of the autumn statement then, and obviously this is, and I still need to digest it more fully, and there's one or two things in there that I feel are a little ambiguous, so I'd like to see the detail, and I think we've all been here before, members, so you'll understand that. But let's just look at the headlines. There was an assurance given that the figures that were quoted in the spending review in 21, there'll be no cuts to that, and what the spending review 21 said is that core spending power would increase by about 3% this year and next year as well. Interestingly, now, just so we're all on the same page, when we talk about core spending power, that's a combination of council tax and government funding. So it'd be very possible for us to see an increase in our core spending power, so the amount of total resources we've got, but the government to reduce our funding. Because what would happen is the government could reduce our funding and say, you're going to get more from council tax because we'll assume you raise council tax. And at the end of it, our core spending power goes up, but only if members increase council tax. And that's what's happened before. And so as we move to point 2, the government have allowed members some council tax flexibility. We've had this in the past, as members will know. So the core council tax can now go up to 3% compared to 2% last year. And we have a further provision to raise council tax for 2% for adult social care. Now, of course, in our context, think about what we've just talked about and that fair cost of care and our £580 bed rate having to go to 900. Clearly, an expectation from government have recognised that councils are under this sort of pressure and therefore have given you the option to solve that for us, if you so wish. So, but they also say they are going to give us some new funding for adult social care on top, which would be great. This is where I feel there's a little bit of ambiguity, but I'm going to be positive today because I like a change. And I feel that we are going to get more grant funding than what I expected us to in adult social care. I just wouldn't like to quote the figure at this stage. We'll wait and see we get a bit more detail. One thing's for sure, that funding is likely to come with some labels and some expectations. Members will have seen today that we need to help the NHS in terms of discharge. Members will have seen that sort of thing. So we won't be quite, what is very unlikely is that we'll be given extra money to subsidise current costs. There'll be a bit of extra money to subsidise current costs, and I think some extra money to do some new things to help out our health colleagues and ourselves as well, of course. So I'm hoping by the time we have our briefing in early December that I'll be able to have a bit more clarity about what those numbers might look like. We've referenced the delay in the charging reform, so we're all up to speed with that. The household fund continues into 23-24. So members, we've discussed this at my director briefing, I think a few times, where we get about 130,000 to help those who are more financially vulnerable in our community with their bills. It's something that's been in place now for the last year, and I'm very pleased that the government have committed to doing it again for 23-24. I was particularly worried about those people we've been able to help a little bit with their rising bills suddenly being left without any support from us, and I think it would have put real pressure on those we've been helping. So really pleased that the government have made a commitment for that to continue. I just wonder at what point we'll be able to withdraw it. That's the issue that will be challenging, I think. Settlements silent on some things like new homes bonus and other funding we get. We 3 years ago we were supposed to be in the last year of new homes bonus, and we're still getting it, so I have no idea what that might mean yet. Jane. And then business rates, a variety of things announced about business rates. I think the most important thing for our community in particular and our economy is that those organisations, businesses that work in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors will continue to not have to pay the full amount of rates, which I think is good for a lot of businesses in our economy. And of course, as members know, we do have a lot of small businesses in our economy as well who will be supported through reliefs as well. So I think from an economic perspective, I think that is good news for our economy, that businesses will continue to get supported in relation to their rates. So Jane, I think now I quickly managed to knock this up because I know members will be desperate to understand what a 5% for council tax might mean. And for residents, it would mean in a Band D property, it would mean an annual rise of £95. So what's that, about £8-9 per month? It would mean for an individual. Of course, if you are on council tax support, then it will probably be equivalent of about £6 per month. The yield for the council would be an extra £600,000. So our assumption at the moment is 3%, which increases the bottom line by 900,000. You can add a further 610 onto that if you go to 5%. And of course, the really challenging point of that is that if you forego 610,000 by sticking with 3% this year, you not only lose 610 this year, you lose it every subsequent year as well, because you can never get it back. So it isn't really a £610,000 decision. It's one that, over a 10-year period, it's a £7 million decision. Over a 5-year period, it's a 3.5 million, 3.34 million decision. So a big decision for members that the government have kindly given you. And I hope that in December, when we have a further briefing, we'll be able to paint, I'll be able to bring the MTFP and, having fleshed out some of the detail that was given today, sort of paint a picture of what things look like to try and give you the information that you might need as members as you contemplate the budget for next year, and clearly what is going to be a very, very critical decision for our financial viability around council tax. But we'll talk more about that in December. So that's it, Chair. I think I've spoken for long enough. I hope members have found that useful. As I say, we will. Oh, I've got some key dates there. I forgot about those. I was so excited to get to the end, I think. No, yes, we've got our pre-budget briefing on the 5th. I understand the local government might do something on local government policy statement later in the year, but the settlement won't arrive till December time. But as I say, I hope we're in a position on the 5th of December to give members an insight into what the overall financial position looks like, so you can deliberate, you know, those important decisions that you'll have to make, or start deliberating for those important decisions you'll have to make in February. So yes, Chair, that is it. I hope members have found that useful. And if there are, I have to say, I will be doing some modelling work for when we get to the 5th of December session. And if members are particularly interested in me modelling certain variables, so for example, if you want me to model a pay rise of 6%, I can do that. If you want me to model a council tax freeze, I can do that. If you want me to model some additional government funding, I can do that. So happy for members to, if you so wish to see a certain model, then I can see what I can do to weave that into my into my work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I think that was, well, it was as always extremely clear. Thank you. And I think it was helpful for members. Councillor Payne.
Yes, Chair.
Are you wanting, as the portfolio holder, to add anything about what your thinking or Cabinet's thinking is on this?
You can see from what Sav's just presented that we're living in very volatile times. And I think the work that's being done by the finance team to produce a model that will give us flexibility to plug into different variables is going to be extremely helpful and extremely valuable, especially for our meeting on the 5th of December. We want to be able to share as much information as we can with all members. So we hope that all members will attend that briefing on the 5th of December and come with questions in mind so that we can answer those questions and get everybody in a position where they understand fully what's going on in the budget in January. It's being presented to Cabinet in January.
Thank you. Members, questions? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, you said, Sav, there was a lot of empty houses. Do we know why there's so many empty houses? And am I right in thinking that after a period we do get some council tax on empty houses?
Yeah, I don't know why there is so many, and I will go back and ask the question on that. I don't know why, and I'd have to go back and ask the question. Yes, there are rules around empty properties, but I will come back to you on that in particular. But yes, I think where all I can say from the council's point of view is where we are allowed to charge legally, we maximise the charges that we can levy, but there are some exemptions, for example, in relation to empty homes. So the reason I will sort of come back to you with an answer for that is I want to be clear whether it's a certain type of empty that means we cannot charge and therefore is eligible for the statutory discount. And I think that's the case, but I'll come back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. Can I have another go, Chair? But then I'll be done with my questions. It was just the clarity on the 5% council tax flexibility, because I think I'm right, but please tell me if I'm not, that currently we can charge 3% and then there's a 2% we can add on for the adult social care. So are you now saying that we can have 5% and then extra 2% or whatever for adult social care? Or is that wrong?
No. The position that the government have announced today is that you can raise core council tax by 3% and you can add a further 2% for the social care precepts. That would give us a total of 5%.
Right. I was under the impression that was what we already had.
No. What the government had allowed previously was 2 + 1.
Right.
So the government have checked. or 2 plus or core of 3. So a core of 3 without the precept.
So the total has gone from 3 to 5.
It's gone from 3 to
Okay.
5.
Right. Okay.
But yes, I would
Yep.
have liked it to have gone to 7. But maybe you wouldn't have, Councillor Brown. I don't know. But yes, yeah, the flexibility
That
is
just
up to
heaps the
5.
decision onto us. That
Ye-
we have, which
yes,
isn't really
whether
a
it's 5 or
choice,
7,
basically,
you have a
yeah.
local decision to make, certainly.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Chair. I always struggle with when the government says, you have greater flexibility, local council, to actually go from 3 to 5%. So are they just passing the buck? This is the sort of thing that goes through my head. So one of the questions I would like to ask, is that when we discuss council tax, we tend to discuss it in sort of like a big sledgehammer, saying we're going to increase it to 5% or we're going to increase it to 3%. I'd really like to know, we do discount, or we do provide discount, I'll use that word, which is probably not the correct word, for people who struggle with income. And I just wonder whether we can produce some modelling that says if we were to go for 5% and the vast majority of the population pay 5%, but those that are disadvantaged pay, a larger chunk, a smaller chunk, smaller chunk, if that makes any sense, whether we can do some sort of sliding scale and whether that can be modelled or not, because it all seems so dreadfully difficult, doesn't it? It's 5 or 3 and everybody suffers. Could we increase the help?
Well,
Still get a good
there's two
return.
things I'd say in response to your question, Councillor, is that the first thing, you're absolutely right, there is a discount scheme in place for those who are financially vulnerable. And that means that those people can effectively get up to 25% off the value of their bill. On top of that, one of the things that this council does, and I can tell you that very few councils do this, is that we have a further discretionary pot of £20,000, which we have had for some time and retained when others have removed theirs because of financial challenges, that allows Andrea, who, as everybody knows, runs the council tax team, allows Andrea to allow individuals who are in even more severe financial difficulties to apply for an extra discount on top of the core discount they may get. So we do have our core scheme and then a discretionary scheme that we have been committed to for some time and we retain. Of course, we do have the ability to revise or look differently at the local council tax support scheme. We can do that. It's quite a big piece of work to do that.
Yeah.
It's something that, because of the nature of consultation that you'd have to do on that, it'd be something that would be very difficult to do in time for the 23-24 financial year. However, it is something that we could commit to do, and it's something that we've talked about doing, because one of Andrea's comments is that the scheme as it is could be simplified, both for our customers, but also for the staff administering it. So I think that and we've looked into a couple of different schemes that other authorities have got. So we couldn't do it in time for 23-24, but we could commit to looking at that next year with a view to giving members some options in time for the 24-25 year. So we could do that.
Chair, can I just follow up on?
Yes, of course.
So the only thing I'd say also, just on top of that, is that it won't get to the nub of the issue, which is ultimately that, and this is a political statement, that the council tax is the wrong type of tax for much of the spend that it relates to. It's a regressive tax. People who are poorer seem to pay more of their disposable income. It's not means tested. And whilst we can put some elements of support, ultimately it would never go far enough to address some of the issues of the tax not being quite right. But I don't think any central government of any colour would want to try to address that issue, because it's also a very easy way to increase local funding and enable local decision making.
Thank you for that. I do remember Margaret Thatcher, so I do remember the slight disturbances we had there when they were trying to reform council tax. So, but I welcome the fact that we are going to be examining. I'm very conscious that we as councillors have to sit here and go, okay, no, it's 5%, no, it's 3%, and that seems a big nut to crack, when actually we could perhaps have a slightly more equitable system and a slightly more flexible system. But I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor, Mr. Rockets, that's a tremendously difficult job and not an easy job that can be trotted out tomorrow. So I do appreciate that. I'd like to follow up in a minute, Nick, if you want to, unless it's on this topic.
If it wasn't a topic, you'd probably steal what you probably had to say.
Go on, you say it. You said I'm quite happy. I've got another topic I wanted to leap into.
No.
That's it.
Just as a matter of interest, and I don't think we'd ever do this, but it may get brought up. Council tax, could you vary it by band?
No.
Thank you.
As much as I would like to, there have been discussions about, for example, those in band H paying additional premiums, for example. But no, as it stands now, there is no local ability.
So you couldn't do it, and then for the higher ones, go for a referendum to pay 10%.
No, but members will be aware that, and I was actually, whilst my family was watching TV last night, I was looking into what they've done in North Yorkshire. I don't know if members have seen this, but the government are in the midst of passing legislation that allows 100% premium on those with second homes. So in North Yorkshire, where you've got villages which are dominated, if you like, by people who's got a second home there, a bit like Cornwall and other areas, they've just they've very recently approved a policy subject to legislation being given to actually introduce such a premium. And actually here locally in Rutland, based on the information we had, if we also approve such a scheme, it would generate, or it could generate, up to £400,000 for us. So it will be something that we will look to bring forward for a decision for members in due course, subject to the legislation being passed, of course. But so that's the sort of thing you can do, Councillor Beggy, but not in the way you described.
Before I bring you back in, Councillor Ainsley, there's something I would like to say in relation to your previous point. And also actually in what you've just said to us, Sav. I think on the basis of the discussions we've all had earlier this year, we would welcome, as members, some proposals from you along the lines you've just described for the second homes. Whether we accept them at the end of the day, of course, is another matter, but I think we definitely would welcome them, because I think quite a number of us raised similar concerns about second homes. I put it to the committee, though, that the previous point about exploring further, not for next financial year, but for the one after, a simplified and perhaps more advantageous for individuals policy in relation to council tax relief, we would quite like to see something from officers. Do you agree? Yes, yeah. I think we acknowledge the Chief Executive's point that actually the problem is the global finances, not the impact on individuals. But as elected members, we are very conscious about the needs of the individual residents within our wards. And so we are trying to balance the two, which is even more difficult. So if officers, there was agreement, so if officers can find some time to do that, I think we would very much welcome that. Thank you. Councillor Ainsley, you can move on now.
It's two very simple questions. I hope they're simple. When we looked at the fair cost of care, and 580 to 900 pounds, I'm guessing that isn't a local issue, that's a national issue, is it?
There are pressure on care fees in every part of the country.
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, and Mark might know better than me on this, for example, in Leicestershire, there are also pressures, but the fees that they're able to place at are around sort of 750, 800 type mark. So there is a Rutland premium. That's how it appears to be, and I think from what John tells me, there is an element of a Rutland premium to this.
I'll bring the Chief Exec in on this one.
Thanks. Yeah. So some of our unique situation is back to, so let's just go back to why the fair cost of care was brought in the first place, which was just to sort of look at the way that the model worked was that local authority would pay slightly less and people who were self-funders would pay more, and there'd be a balanced business for the organisation. What the government is saying about fairer costs is not saying that local authorities are just not paying enough. It's that people should pay less, shouldn't have to subsidise local authority places. So it's about both ending up somewhere closer to the middle. So that's the whole principle behind it. Our unique situation about our market is related to the fact that to be sustainable, they don't rely on us. We haven't got the quantum of commissioned beds to rely on us to subsidise any part of their business. So in essence, they can still run a business whether we were here or not. Whereas in the city, particularly, is a good example, and the majority of Leicestershire, although slightly less than somewhere like cities, they rely quite heavily on the local authority as part of the market. So in essence, we're getting pulled to a situation where we're paying the same rates as the self-funders, who aren't paying less, even if we're taking up beds in those situations. So it's not helping us, and it's not helping self-funders either. But people will still be prepared to pay for it because it's a care home in Rutland. Where it gets us to eventually is it raises some questions for us long-term about how we intervene in the market and whether we go as far to run our own provision. Big step, and the fundamental problem in somewhere like Rutland is trying to find some land that someone doesn't want to build nice houses on, that you could build a care home in at good value is really challenging to then build a business case for. So it becomes quite difficult to find the right solution for us.
Can I ask a quick question on that one?
Can I quickly follow up before I forget what I was going to say? It's exactly on the point that was just raised by Mark.
Go on then.
I think that that is the issue, isn't it? We've had a series of developers come into Rutland and build care homes that are aimed at a certain market that certainly isn't the cheaper end of the market. And I think that's probably, I don't know, causing the Rutland premium. So any intervention that we could creatively come up with to actually dampen those pressures and perhaps dissuade the words premium care home market from coming here would perhaps be a good thing.
I'll ask my question before I bring Councillor Payne in, because it's related to that. We have in the past in this chamber talked about this as a problem that was going to get bigger. And I'm going back to 3 years now. And it was mooted then that we might have to intervene in the market in the way you describe, Mr. Andrews. Are we including that possibility in our thinking as we start to look at the estate that we currently hold?
So our current estate doesn't really lend itself, if I'm honest, it doesn't really lend itself. They're always open to different usages, but it doesn't really lend itself to what you'd want in terms of modern care home. The other side of this, though, is that actually our business case gets stronger the more we work in partnership with other commissioners of care. Hence the concept about actually probably the better way for us to look at reduced costs and our place in the market and how we work is alongside our health colleagues and looking at ways that we can utilise space that we have. As well as sort of future investments in terms of actually delivering our own provision. Because there are questions about what is the most expensive. So if you start to think about pool budgets, you can start to pay some of these premiums if you're paying less for some of the really expensive placements that you've got, and you may be able to place them in a much smaller type of provision. So when you look at it on that continuum as a whole shared budget, it may not be our type of care that you want to save the money on, but you don't spend as much in the overall because you're actually developing provision for this cohort over here, which is actually maybe mainly health cases, but supported by us. So there's lots of interesting things in the way that you can do things. In the places where I've seen a kind of partnership approach, and even with the private sector alongside health and care, they've tended to be just shifting old local authority care homes into a different type of delivery model, not actually building their own, because of the costs of the build in the first place, which tend to be prohibitive because we're not awash with capital either. So what we were thinking, just one last thing, what we're thinking about the reforms, it's a double-edged sword for us, isn't it? So, me and Steph had long conversations about the issues of the overall reforms and whether they're going to be affordable and what money we'll get. Of course, now the reforms are gone, but we're still probably paying the fairer cost of care still hanging over us, not by a policy decision, but just by the nature of our market. Actually, the government providing funding for that would have been very useful, even if they weren't funding all of it, because the position we're in now is that they're not going forward with the reforms. So we may have to lean into whatever comes out of those calculations, which may be either out of the 2% that you may or may not agree for adult social care, or some of the grants that might come in depending on how they're meant to be used.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Just to let the committee know that we are also looking outwardly as well at doing some lobbying. And there's a letter going to the MP from Councillor Harvey about this situation to take it further.
Thank you. I think, though, that everybody knows my views on that, that lobbying has its place, but we mustn't rely on it.
No, not to rely on it, but it's still another string to the bow.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please. No, please do. Your hand was up.
Apologies, Councillor, sorry, thank you.
My fault, sorry. Too many things going on, fiddling with pen and trying to do the button. Councillor Payne, I think this is probably aimed at you in that I was really quite surprised that we're not getting any cuts timed for this financial year. Is that still the situation? Is that something that is a conscious decision, or is it put in the too difficult bit to introduce cuts early?
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. We are looking, we're undergoing quite a huge amount of change and pulling together all the threads at the moment, and we need to see the bigger picture, because what we absolutely don't want to do is put the council at risk. And I think I've said this before. So we've got three main bits of work going on. We've got the asset review just coming to fruition. We've got the work that the CLT are doing with Human Engine. And we've got a programme of changes that have been identified by the CLT and the members. We want to pull all that together to ensure that we're not jeopardising anything or anything's falling through the cracks. And that's what we're doing at the moment, pulling that whole view together, that total view. So we'll have a big programme of change.
It's not, I perfectly realise this is not an easy decisions to be made. But I can't help but feeling the sort of thing my grandmother used to say was that a stitch in time saves 9. So if we could make some small cuts even now, maybe we could.
Yeah, I think we're very clear. So for this next year's budget, the strategy that was approved at council was 800. We put forward a range of options, some temporary, some more permanent, to go forward against that 800. So around 1.5 million, and Cabinet are considering those at the moment. So they're likely to come forward in the budget. Then we're looking at the closing the gap, as Sap put in his paper around the sustainability. Around 4.5 million is probably what we need to take out of the organisation to make it sustainable. Notwithstanding what we just heard here and its implications and the decisions you might make in council tax. And I think that's the bit we need to have a look at in more detail. So we're hoping to get you soon an understanding of the 1.5. There was a question about the questions and how they relate to some of those savings going forward, both the longer term ones and the ones for next year, which we'll give you. But I think we also want to talk about how your decisions taken in the short term and the decisions that could be taken by future councils off the back of that decision may affect how far you need to go in some of those longer term plans. But ultimately, we've identified 1.5 so far, but it will be a decision for you. Longer term, we've identified programs of around 4.5 million. Again, that will be dependent on the business cases surrounding them, which Human Engine are helping us with. And then the final bit is whether there's any gaps off the back of government funding, whether it goes up and whether it goes down.
Thank you. Just to be absolutely clear, 1.5 is going to be presented at the budget, is that right? So that's in January.
Cabinet, sorry.
Go on.
Cabinet guesses on January the 12th. So obviously everybody will have access to that with the published papers. Did you want to say anything else to that, councillor?
Okay, thank you.
I'll
Thank you very
just
much.
clarify that there is a meeting in January of the Scrutiny Committee specifically to look at the budget, but it actually is after Cabinet has looked at it. I do have another point to make, as Councillor Beggy isn't going to make it, and it's one that he usually does, and that is, can we be actively looking at income generation as well as cuts? I noted what you said, Sav, about the investment income that we're getting, which is great. But I think we need to have a focus, not just on investment income, but income more generally, what we can do to maximize the income that we receive. And I don't mean the obvious putting car parking charges up, which our friends in Leicester City have just announced they're going to do. I think we need to be more creative than that.
So yes, we can, but there is a caveat that I always say with this, and it's something that we've been looking at. When you look at some of the creative things that councils are trying to do, and they get themselves into trouble, and fundamentally, my belief, and it's a personal belief, is that councils do best when they focus on their core activity. And the question about saving money tends to be around actually how can you focus the amount of resources you have to deliver your core activity. And the core activity has to be your statutory duties and responsibilities. What councils tend to do to generate income, apart from some of the core stuff that we do, is you go beyond that. And we tend to not do it very well. And it can create a legacy issue when it's not done very well. As you have seen in terms of some of the investments or opportunities that other councils got into. So it's not a no from me at all, but I think fundamentally the bottom line for me is work out the resources that you've got after the decisions you make as a council around what you're prepared to charge in council tax. And whilst you can maximise incomes with different initiatives, focus primarily on resizing the organisation to deliver your core purpose as a council.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. And I think to add to that, if you look at the amount of money that we need to take out of this organisation, you have to ask yourself the question, realistically, would you find the equivalent of that in revenue? And I think that, you know, that, so I mean, over a period of time, we've seen the 27, 28 hopefully no longer relying on reserves, but that's 4 million out of the organisation. Realistically, do you think this council could create a revenue of 4 million?
I don't think that was quite what I was saying. Do you want to come in?
Sorry, sorry, then I've misunderstood. When you're talking about revenue opportunities, I assumed that was to increase our spending power and to help fund our other activities.
No, it was more that we are not being funded to deliver what is our core, and there may be revenue opportunities to fill some of that gap so we can continue to satisfy the legislative nature of what we have to do. I totally recognise that that wouldn't raise £4 million, but any amount that we can raise is one less service that we are going to cut potentially. So we can't ignore it.
Oh, sorry, Chair, I completely agree with that, but I was just making the point that that isn't the solution to the big challenge.
No, I don't think I was suggesting it was. Do you want to come in on that, Councillor Beggy?
There we go. No, I was just going to reiterate, you said we can't look at, you shouldn't look at things in silos. There's costs and there's revenue, and obviously the more revenue comes in, the least you have to reduce the costs. And with joined up thinking, like we were discussing last night, some of the things can be looked up in silos, but if you actually then begin to join those bits together, actually the sum of the parts is greater than the individual silo.
So, you are absolutely right. A good example might be, some of the duties that we may have. Cultural services is a good example, how you might deliver that in the future, and what the opportunities are, and in partnership with other organisations who sometimes deliver the offer better than you do, for the benefit of both organisations. And there's plenty of public-private partnerships around lots of different things around the country. I guess what I fundamentally say is that be careful of just looking at the numbers. So a good example is you may run some business units, for instance, and it may wash its face. It may even look to give you an income. And even if you take in all the overheads, if you run it well, it may still give you income, even if you take in all the overheads. But there's another cost to the organisation in terms of its oversight in the organisation, the burden it has when it has staffing missing and then you have to replace them or you can't recruit to them. All of these put pressure on the organisation and distract it from its core duties. So I guess what I'm saying is just be careful. It's not always a golden goose. Even if it brings money in, it brings a distraction from your core duties. So you just need to be careful about how far you diversify, given that the local authorities, one of the main problems with it is it's very diverse as it is with its core services, and diversifying it more spreads your idea of leadership and specialism.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Right, on that then, I think concludes item 9. Thank you very much, Sav, for coming in your presentation, and also Councillor Payne for coming along and answering questions. You are released. You may leave if you wish or not.
Chair, do you have any thoughts about the capital programme at all?
We were confining ourselves to Sav's presentation, and we hadn't, because we thought we were going to talk about revenue. Does anybody have any thoughts about the capital programme? No. What I would suggest is that I send a note out after this meeting to all councillors to ask them to be particularly prepared to include thoughts on capital when we meet on the 5th of December. Okay, yeah. In that we didn't cover it tonight. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, well, if we're all happy with that, then I am not going to insist on either Councillor Payne nor Mr. Della Rocca staying, but if they wish to, they might, or indeed Mr. Merry, who's been ever so quiet at the end, and I've nearly forgotten. Apologies.
Chair, I think you need me for the performance report, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah. I had actually asked for the performance report for the leader.
Okay.
Quite happy for you to stay and support.
stay.
Would have been equally happy if every cabinet member would have been here.
Okay.
But that was the basis I was working on. So that's up to you. I don't want to make you stay if you don't have to. Moving on then to item 10. the corporate strategy report. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you very much. And as suggested in the agenda, I will be doing a two-hander. I will be doing the broad sweep introduction and the performance management report, which I'm sure, well, I hope the panel have had chance to have a look at, which was Appendix A of the October Cabinet Papers. I will bring in Councillor Payne as the portfolio holder. Right, start off. As a reminder, and I'm sure I don't need to remind the panel of this, Future Rutland was our significant biggest conversation with our residents, I think ever actually, for Rutland County Council. From that, we came up with, or the public, we together collectively came up with Future Rutland, a 50-year vision with 4 key themes within that: a special place, sustainable lives, healthy and well, and a county for everyone. If you recollect, I brought the corporate strategy for approval at full council. Clearly, you're not going to get 50 years done in one fell swoop. This is a 5-year corporate strategy from 22 to 27, placing those 4 themes from Future Rutland at the heart of it, as well, of course, as a 5th one, a modern and effective council. Obviously, this evening I'll be focusing on the 2-year delivery plan. I don't want to repeat the obvious things that Mr. Della Rocca made about uncertainties. Clearly, we are in incredibly uncertain times, things out of our control. But nevertheless, as I'm sure you've seen from the performance report, we've made a really good start in delivering on that 2-year plan. One point that I would like to make in the corporate strategy, we talked of our commitments as a council, but we also talked about our commitments as residents. And actually, there are a couple of things in that performance report. For example, the obvious one is reducing waste. Our residual waste has actually gone up. And whilst I'm sure if Councillor Oxley was here, he would talk about our communications engagement strategy to help people to reduce their waste, there are things within this performance report where clearly spreading that word in the sense of the collective responsibility we have as residents of Rutland. Another one perhaps to pick out would be around percentage of adults who are active. Clearly, people living an active lifestyle will reap the rewards with their health going forwards. Clearly, the big headlines within the 2-year delivery plan, some of them we've touched on this evening. Asset strategy, obviously you're aware that Cabinet took a report this Tuesday. There were some exempt items, which obviously I won't go into in a public meeting, Chair, but they were outlining tangible, concrete steps for that key part. Our assets are a linchpin for our service delivery. Financial sustainability, we've already had an item on that. We are aware of the absolute need for us to be financially sustainable. Again, we've had our strategy at council. We were aware of all the myriad of caveats and unknowns, and clearly Mr. Della Rocca and Councillor Payne have added a bit more detail to that. Economic strategy, that is an agenda item later on, both with me as the portfolio holder and Councillor Andrew Brown, so I'll talk about that later. Local plan, you are aware that that work is moving forwards with our all members group, engagement on issues and options and call for sites. Place-based health, obviously Councillor Harvey isn't here this evening, Chair, but that again is going on, and she updated us at full council. The performance management is crucial. For those of you who've served when we had the previous corporate strategy, you will see a difference between the performance management report that has come out for this corporate strategy and the previous ones. I think it is very clear, and it is measuring those targets. As I say, that was in Appendix A. Councillor Payne will go into a bit more detail with that. I cannot underscore how important our performance management is. By having that data, we are able to be agile. I've already talked about our uncertain times. Cost of living, that's not just for our residents, that's for us as a council. Staff recruitment, actually we can design the best services in the world, but if we don't have staff to deliver them, we're on a back foot. Adult social care has already been touched on this evening. That is a challenge that, as the chair rightly pointed out, most certainly isn't new, not least because we have an ageing population with the likelihood of complex health needs being obviously higher the older people get. Send always a demand-led budget, and again, you know, wanting our young people to have the best chance to fulfill their full potential, and a general increased demand on our services. So we could be forgiven for thinking we've got our backs up against the wall, but I would hope when I hand over to Councillor Payne, you will see that we've actually made really good progress. And I think the key thing to note is that we're on time with a lot of the things that we said that we would start the ball rolling on. We have, and we've done it robustly. I will now hand over to Councillor Payne, and obviously if we handle questions between us would probably seem sensible.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Chair? Thank you. The performance report you've had a look at is the New Star performance report measured against our strategic aims, as Lucy's just said, within the new corporate strategy, which was agreed by Council in July this year. It's a whole new set of indicators, of which are 137 in the report. Some are new measures, and in some cases we don't have any historical data to draw upon to baseline performance against, and there are 11 of these measures in the report, which will mature as reporting progresses and the data set increases over time. Overall, we found that performance is very positive, with 64% or 81 of the indicators on target, and a further 8%, 10 of them are within 5% of the target. And we have good examples of positive performance, high levels of satisfaction in adult and children's services, quality of recycling, the good condition of the roads in the county, numbers of children and young people, including care leavers who are in education, training or employment. These are just some of the notable achievements. There are more to see in the report, of course. Having said that, though, we're being very honest about our performance, and performance is off target for 28% or 35 of the indicators. Our finances remain under pressure, and our budget is not balanced, as you heard previously, other than from use of reserves. We're experiencing a high staff turnover and vacancy rate. Our housing supply remains under 5 years. Our website needs to become more accessible, and we continue to see higher levels of residual waste. In the new report, you can also see what action is being taken to bring missed targets back on track. And we also now have a forward from our chief executive, which picks out the points to note in the council's performance and also the key challenges. A huge amount of work has gone into this, producing and aligning it to the strategy, in defining the content, making navigation easy and presentable. We are actually tentatively looking at the prospect of automating the data collection, but some of the tools for this are create a whole new industry, as some of you will be aware, through maintenance and support. We are aware of this and will seek the most efficient and cost-effective approach to doing this. I welcome your comments on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen. Councillor Brown.
There seems to be quite a high level of staff turnover and vacancy rate. Have we got any indication of why it's so? Is that common across all councils, or is it exclusive?
As head of paid
As
services,
head of
we're in
paid
the best,
service, maybe
he's in the best position.
Yeah, we've got about 1 in 10 vacant. But it's not that we just can't recruit to certain posts. They're coming in and out of our organisation, some for good reasons. So people We were talking, weren't we, about some cover and some of the risks in adult social care at the moment, but a number of their social workers have moved on to promotions elsewhere because the opportunities are out there and people don't have to travel as far, particularly for leadership roles, because they can work from home and they can go to more councils as a result of that. I mean, it helps us, but it doesn't at the same time. So, and it's not one particular type of post in our organisation. We've got problems recruiting across the board. It's going to be interesting recruiting to 2 statutory roles, adult social care and Section 151. But again, as you know, their circumstances, there's very personal reasons why they're doing it and very valid reasons why they're moving to do what they're doing, and John's retiring. It will continue to be a really challenging time for local government. It doesn't help that, whilst we were talking about the pay settlement, which is very positive for our staff, it's still anywhere near inflation. And it's on top of the decisions that have been made in the past where we didn't keep in line with inflation before and had pay freezes at times. So local government is a challenging place, and it's not always the best place. And as there are lots of opportunities elsewhere, staff are making personal decisions. We're trying, there are lots of things that local government is trying to do to tackle this, but it will be interesting in the context of having to resize your organisation anyway. I think it's something that's going to be with us for at least 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. And my view, alongside with some of my health colleagues as well, and particularly in the care sector, is actually we probably need to reinvent roles and to be more innovative in the types of services and roles that we can offer. For some, that's not possible. When you need a planner, you need a planner. But actually, I think in some roles we can probably change and transform.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, which raises the question, are you here as Chief Executive for the long term?
Hey, there's a rumor going around. Someone asked me that the other day. I spoke to you about it the other day. Actually, you asked me the same question. So, elections are always a difficult time for chief execs, in case the administration that comes in and the leader doesn't want to work with the chief exec. So that's something, or the other way around. That can happen. For very personal reasons, I would want to be here at least for the next year and a half because of my children being in school. I am freer after that. But actually, from a professional perspective, it's a really difficult time, but it's actually quite an exciting time. And actually, from a leadership perspective, there is a lot of challenge. And the idea over the next 3 to 4 years of transforming this organisation, making it a sustainable organisation financially and fit for the future, is a really exciting opportunity. I would like to see that opportunity through, but circumstances might be, as I say, with an election coming, that things might change, mightn't they? But
I think what we may have here is something along the lines that you get in football clubs. Oh yes, I'm staying with this club, and the next day they've gone. But I hope not. Taking the essence of what you said at the end there, though, Mr. Andrews, about the wanting to see the job through, the transformation job. That then is saying to me, sitting here, money isn't the only motivation. Job satisfaction is another one. And allied to that, of course, if you do take the transformation through, it will be good for your CV anyway. I'm sorry I'm making this personal, but I am getting to a point here. And my point is, are we actually looking at our vacancies, the roles, from a point of view of what makes it an attractive job for somebody not only to come, but to stay? And are all our vacancies, are we confident that the entirety of the package is attractive. It's not just the money or some other aspect. Please do.
Just so you'd have to say the same thing twice. And on the back of that, have we got any robust reporting on outcomes of exit interviews about reasons why people are leaving? And are we happy and assured that the exit interview process is robust and I can't think of the right word, equitable?
Let me start there. So being a small authority, you can be closer to some of the reasons. So some people don't take up their exit interviews. So we do offer exit interviews to all. It happens, it's independent. It's done by HR. Invariably, you know, a proportion do take it up. But actually you can start to, being a small organization, you can get underneath of the reasons why people are leaving and or what the real reasons of why people are leaving as well. There will always be in any organization a cohort of people who leave because, for instance, we felt as an organization they weren't performing and they thought they were, and it created tensions. There'll be others who leave for personal reasons, others leave for professional reasons. I'm confident in the approaches that we have at the moment, and I'm comfortable about where we've got to at this point in terms of developing the type of culture that I would like to see. It is not embedded by any stretch of the imagination, and not every area is working in the way that we wanted to. In fact, it was something I raised, wasn't it, an all-staff briefing that we had with the staff. And there was something about people and how they perform in the team and how they work in the team when they come together. And my challenge really was that the stat was presented around the frontline staff who asked me a question about what we do. And my challenge was not to them, but to the managers, because actually I felt the managers were letting them down by not actually working with them in the way that I wanted them to. And my challenge was, I will start to look at much lower in the organization, those particular areas that are coming up in the stats, and have discussions with individual managers about why that will be. And you can do that in this organization. So what's the beauty, I think, for me is I get to go to team meetings. I don't get to do it hugely regularly, but I get to go to team meetings. I get to meet staff independently of all the lines of management in an organization this size. And it gives you a real understanding of where you're at the moment. We have a unique selling point, but it can be a difficult place to work. So number one, local government is challenging to work in. It can be a really difficult place to work and to stay positive for our staff, because actually the expectations are very high and your ability to meet those expectations are challenged by the environment and the funding and a range of other things. But it can be hugely rewarding. Your point about the roles and can you then focus on the roles? The answer is yes, you can. You know, one of the things I've always said to our social workers is my dream, we're not quite there yet, is that this is the place that social workers will want to go, because it's the place that you can do the type of social work that they dreamed of doing, that they couldn't do in some of the other areas with hugely high caseloads, to the point that really they're just trying to stay afloat and manage risk. Our caseloads are high-ish, but they're not high like the city or the counties and other places, and they're where I would like them to be. And what that enables us to do is to do the type of social work that we'd like people to do. I'd like that in other roles around the organisation as well. And we're not quite there yet in some of those other places. But I'd like it to be like that, because you can sell that kind of concept. I guess the final point is that, you know, we've had people who, for certain roles, have come and been very proactive, even ahead of our adverts, because they were looking for an opportunity to come up in Rutland because they wanted to come here and they wanted to work here. So we do have a product. It's not quite where I want it to be yet still, but it is a product that we can sell. It is in a context nationally of a huge shortage in skilled practitioners, and you're not going to get away from the fact that you will need a planner, and planners are hard to get. You will need a highways engineer, and highways engineers are like hen's teeth.
Councillor Ainsley and then back to
Okay,
Councillor
this is
Begg.
not so much a question as a sort of statement, so I apologise for that. I think we all need to recognise that the pandemic has caused a significant shift in people's expectations, and they are reappraising the way they work and what work means to them. And if we look at Belbin's, pyramid of needs, it's quite obvious that salary is one of those, but it's not the most important, surprisingly enough. And I just echo what you're saying, is that you really need to examine the roles to refresh and reinvigorate those roles so that they actually become attractive. There is an awful lot going for Rutland. It's a small, agile organisation, but there's also means that you will become the focus and the pressures will be high. But I think the problems are generally because of the societal changes. That's what I sincerely believe.
Yeah, I think one of the things is the power balance has changed between organisations and their employees. Because before, when it was difficult to get jobs, obviously the power was with the employer. And if you don't want to work here, then fine, go somewhere else, we'll get someone else, if you're not performing as we want you to. That power balance has changed, and there is a greater expectation of employees about what they get from their employer. It is challenging for a public service to meet all those expectations, and so some people jump to the private sector. But in others, we have great flexibility to be able to provide opportunities that reward people in a way that they couldn't get anywhere else, and that's the bit we've got to build on. Yeah.
Councillor Beggy.
So going back to my original question, do we have quantifiable reports on exit interviews for reasons, and is it tracked over time?
No, it's not. No.
So it's subjective.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you want to call it that. Sorry, each one has a report, but no, I don't know how you'd quantify it other than how many have one. I don't know.
Well, you were looking for trends in reasons for leaving and see if there were patterns emerging over time.
Okay, I mean, the problem with our SARS scale, isn't it? It would swing all over the place. But yeah, certainly something we can look at in HR, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I for one have sat down with Carol to go over in the resources directorate when people leave and what are the reasons for things. And there's nothing unique about Rutland in the reasons people give. When I go to my treasurer's meeting, nobody can recruit accountants, nobody can recruit benefit staff. We're looking for charging officers. We met with Leicester City and Leicestershire to say we're going to implement care cap reforms. We need charging officers. They said, so do we. We need 6. We need 1. It's so difficult out there recruiting in this environment. When I sat down with Carol to go through reasons, we had somebody leave in finance. They were the directorate accountant for people directorate for social care. They were going to work at an authority where they could far away from where they live, but they could work remotely, just like we offer. So no problem. The job they were going to was paid significantly more at a bigger authority for about 1/10 of the responsibility that you have here. It's very common. These issues are very common. There is no. I think when we sat down and looked at things with Carol, certainly for the resources directorate, there is no themes that you can grasp hold of to say, right, we can take some concrete action here. It's a mixture of different things. A lot of it is to do with people's personal circumstances, family situations, things that suit them, maybe their own personal ambitions. But also, I agree exactly with what Councillor Ainsley said about the world has changed quite differently with the pandemic, and people are reevaluating what they want to do. But I can talk to Carol about what stats we can produce on stuff. But I genuinely, every time I've been here for 10 years, every time we've gone out to recruit an accountant, we can't recruit an accountant. I remember at the time, I think it was when Councillor Diana was here. What was Councillor Duff? She said to me, "Why don't we get applications from firms, from you know, big four firms, KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, because we pay about 15,000, 20,000 pounds less than they do for somebody who's newly qualified. Yeah, so you know, there are lots of different factors in lots of different areas. But you know, honestly, if I thought there was, or if we thought, and I know the Employment and Appeals Committee, I don't know if any members of the scrutiny panel are on that. I think, are you,
I
Councillor Boyle?
chair it.
You chair it. So I think it's a matter that I know you've discussed with Carol, and I know we've looked at recruitment and retention and all those type of issues. If we thought there were 2 or 3 things we could do to address that 1 in 10 issue that you referenced, I think we'd be doing it, really. Honestly, I really think we would be. It's really challenging out there, but it's not unique. Everybody I talk to has got vacancies they can't fill and they don't know what to do about it. There is no magic wand here.
We have discussed it, and for the benefit of members of the committee, one of the issues we were looking at, I think it was only this week, wasn't it? On Tuesday, was that our department that looks after recruitment, the HR department, itself has gone through churn of staff, with people getting promotions and moving on, and they are still not waiting to recruit. The recruitment's happened, the people haven't started completely yet, which obviously limits what they can do beyond the absolutely necessary for day to day. So we do recognise that. We were also talking about apprenticeships on Tuesday, and one of the thoughts we had was that we invest to save and develop our apprenticeship opportunities. Currently, if there is a vacancy, HR discuss with the management of the area where the vacancy is as to whether the role might be one suitable for an apprenticeship. There's more than one type of apprenticeship in local government at the moment, so I'll just use the generic term. And if it is suitable, then they go and recruit. And in fact, we heard from two apprentices at the meeting on Tuesday. But the thought we came up with was that perhaps we should be looking to have apprentices in areas where there aren't necessarily vacancies, and that these apprentices are trained, and they are apprentices of the more of the type that people of my age can remember from when we first were moving into the workplace, where you do an apprenticeship with an organisation, you are not guaranteed a job at the end of it, but clearly if you do well, you can move into it. So Carol Snell, the officer responsible, is going away and looking at that, and will be discussing it with management. I mean, we asked her to, so she will. So that was one option we were looking at. But I think Councillor Begg is right when he says we need to be analysing the exit interviews, because if we're getting a trend of people who are moving on to promotional opportunities, we know we have them in this organisation. Perhaps we're not making it clear enough. If they're moving on to roles that are more challenging, well, I don't think you can get more challenging than a role in Rutland because of the diversity of the work. Perhaps we're not making it clear enough. So I think some analysis along those lines might be helpful. Mr. Andrews.
Yeah, I was just going to add, so Sav will take it away and we'll have a discussion with HR around it. But what I would also say is that so if you take turnover rates in an organisation with small numbers, it doesn't take long before you. So ours is high for us; it's not high for other organisations. But if you think about it, 1 or 2 people make a decision, a personal decision, in 1 or 2 people in a team that's massive. Actually, it's a very small number. Here, 1 or 2 people make a personal decision because it happens in their lives. It has a big impact on our turnover rates. One of the things I'm very keen to understand is the people who are working here and while they're working here, and about their views then, not waiting till they leave. And so we've got a whole process of staff surveying. I think it was actually discussed at the group. It's going back to the committee, isn't it? So we had small surveys running during the pandemic, but we've done another really thorough survey that looked at a whole range of issues around people's management supervision, the culture within the organisation. And broadly, it was really positive, really positive. There's some areas that we need to focus on. We'll bring that to the committee. But I was pleased. People felt that the culture had developed and changed for the positive. It had moved forward. There was acknowledgement. We're not quite there yet in some areas. There wasn't a huge variation, which is again a positive across the different directorates. So it wasn't that one directorate was outperforming the others and skewing the information. So I was pleased because I was worried in the current climate whether there were going to be issues. But no, it was a really positive and an open survey, and that's really important to us. I think is about the ongoing support of our staff and giving them a voice.
Before I bring you in, Mr. Ainsley, and I will in a moment, something that was raised which struck me as quite interesting on Tuesday at the Employment and Appeals Committee. The two apprentices whose views we heard, one didn't like being home-based because he felt that he wasn't maximising the opportunity to learn from others. The other did like being home-based because he liked working on his own and in isolation. And I think that in a way says it all. You know, when you're talking about employees, you're actually not just talking about a social worker or a planner, you're talking about individuals with individual needs and individual preferences, and trying to meet all needs is impossible. Mr. Ainsley.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a thought, really. It's just floated across my brain. Collaborative working, where you actually work together with other local authorities, and obviously leads into item 11, but I can't help but feeling, and it hasn't always been successful. I know we've shared, but nonetheless, is that something that you're actively pursuing? Is it something you've considered? And there's a few other political issues.
That's great. I've got my Christmas shopping in my head.
So yeah, so yes, it is, and not uniquely just with other local authorities. You heard my views on working alongside health, and if a more formal arrangement,
or even local businesses.
Yeah, exactly. And people have done that with, for instance, with IT parts of their service, and so there's lots of different opportunities. We have as well, we don't deliver all our own services. Sometimes we commission, sometimes we ask other local authorities to deliver it where it's best suited for them to do so. I guess the criticism of the approach is when we've discussed it is that it's right for the service, not necessarily right for the organisation. And what I mean by that is that we have lots of different arrangements. But of course, it means we've got lots of different arrangements, and they're really hard to manage, lots of different arrangements. So for instance, instead of having a strategic partner, a local authority who delivers some of your services, we've got arrangements with Northampton, with Peterborough, with Lincolnshire, with Leicestershire, with Leicester City. And it becomes challenging. And I guess our question to when we were talking about transformation is, number one, what's our model? How do we want to set ourselves up as an organisation? Because if you get caught to saying, we're not going to be an in-house delivery for a load of services here, but we are for here, then you get caught in the middle where you need some significant back office support for them. But that then doesn't have sufficient size and scale to be resilient. So do you deliver lots of in-house services? Do you not deliver in-house services? Do you partner with different organisations? Do you integrate completely with other organisations? Do you set up independent organisations to run parts of your service for you? So there are lots of different models. We just have to be careful not to just pick the right one for the service. We have to pick the right approach for the organisation going forward.
I'd like to see something, and this is probably impossible to administer, where you actually did it for the individual. So let's, I was racking my brain then to think of a good example, but I'm thinking that actually if you had somebody who was employed as a administrative role, then maybe allowing them to partner with a local company and then actually to increase their exposure, it might well be sufficient to attract others to come in who say, oh, look, I can go and work for Rutland County Council, and also I can get experience elsewhere in another field. So I was just thinking more about individuals, but I recognise that that would increase tremendous amount of complexity.
Yeah, it has complexity. It's an interesting one though, because people were thinking about it for, so example being, you take our social workers. So sometimes we lose social workers who want to go and work in the complex environment because there's things they don't get to see here, and some like that come to cut and thrust that you might get in a city, and some don't. And we're recognising that sometimes we keep swapping social workers, and there was a discussion about whether you should just swap anyway, and just rotate for experience. But it's in the backdrop that no one can find enough social workers anyway. There is a risk where we've seen elements of sharing roles in the past, where the organisation eventually convinces the person just to stay with them. And we've had that even at a senior level here. So yeah, it does add complexity, but I do like your thinking. It's that there is something about trying to increase the value in a role and the opportunities within roles by working beyond your normal boundaries of your organisation.
Without banging a drum, I just remember my experience in the armed forces. One of the attractions was that you were actually pushed into several environments which you weren't necessarily comfortable with, but used basically the same skill set. So that was often quite encouraging. And but I recognise the complexity of trying to administer all of that.
And I think the difficulty for local authorities, through your chair, is that, as I said previously, we run such a varied model of delivery. And actually, if we were a private business, particularly a climate like this, we'd say, which market are we getting out of? What are we going to focus our energies on? But local authorities can't do that. So you have to deliver over a vast variety of areas and specialisms, and therefore moving people between those specialisms becomes, well, it's impossible, isn't it?
Thank you. Back to the performance report. Any further questions or comments, Mr. Becky?
Yeah, just a few bits of clarity on the RAG ratings, for example. There's a number of examples where, let's take dentistry. We had that last week, where we've got a national average target of 23.4%, but a performance of 25%, but we're registering that as a green, for example. There's several of those examples where either I'm misreading the system or there is a disconnect between the figures and the RAG rating. The teeth, for example, very cool. We discussed it last week or the other week. Year one target, national average 23.4%, position as of August 25%.
What's the reference?
Indicator 3.3. There's a few examples. That just happened to be the typical one.
Why page numbers are so useful?
I was trying to say page numbers. There's a page number indicator.
Have you found it, Mr. Andrews?
Yeah, there's a few of them. I won't pull them out, but no, there's a few in financial sustainability. Others. Well, absolutely. I think I don't know if it. I would have thought it. I would have thought it was conditional formatting, but it probably isn't, because it's got text in the target box. That'd be difficult to do. Yeah, there's quite a number of them, so I'll send you a list to have a look at. Anyway, that's the detail. Just some questions. What would be useful on this report as well is to maybe do the pie chart by directorate. And the reason I say that is if you look at the Children's Directorate, for example, where I counted 30 indicators, 16 of those are red. So actually we're reporting 53%. So where we're reporting overall a 64%, 71% if you include the ambers, actually children's is significantly lower than that. So I think if you brought it out by directorate, we'd be able to see that a lot more clearly without having to add it up. Mhm.
So, but the way we want to represent the strategy is to break down barriers to departments and look at it as a whole. But yeah, I think that it is an issue.
No, I understand that, but if you report 64% and that can be, let's say, increased by what I would call maybe some less important indicators, where you've got some really key indicators where with children's, which is underperforming. I just thought I should bring that out. Another one, which was an interesting well, it'd be interesting to get a comparator. We've got in 2.8 the connected communities about the number of passengers using bus services. And obviously that is significantly below due to the reduction in services. But what would be interesting and probably a clearer comparator is whether or not we could have a comparative against the existing bus services as they were. Does that make sense? So the ones that exist against the ones that existed previously to see how that compares, because that's a meaningless number currently. But surely for that to be meaningful, that past date, you're comparing apples with pears at the moment.
Yeah, I think the point, so obviously all the past, the data is obviously collected on an annual basis anyway, and looking at previous transport plans, any planning of routes, as I know that you're aware, Nick, obviously will be based on user numbers. I'm interested with the apples and pears because I know that you are very good with data, but obviously if you're saying, right, this is a target and whether we're meeting it or not, is your question about whether the target is reasonable, that why, how have we got that target? Does that make sense? Is that
well, if you've got a reduced number of routes, is that target ever achievable? And the second question is of the routes that we are servicing, is 41,000 a good number? Are we using that correctly? Or is that going down or is that going up? So if we had 2 routes against 3, what are those 2 routes that we've still got comparing against the previous 2 routes?
Will we review the target now that what's happened in year is that we've had to change the actual number of routes that we're running?
Sorry, Chair, what's
sorry, I think the other point though that Councillor Beggy was making is that we need, and I'll use his figures, we had 3 routes previously, and that's what the target was set against. We now only have 2. How are those 2 routes comparing a year ago with the same 2 routes that we still had? And in a sense, discounting the 3rd route that no longer exists, because whilst the usage will inevitably go down if you've got 1 fewer route, if the usage has gone down on the same thing, then that's a different issue to look at. Is that right?
Absolutely correct, yeah.
I've taken a note as well, just to share that with the portfolio holder as well, so they can raise that with the transport team.
Councillor Ainsley, are you wanting to come back in, or is Councillor
Yeah,
Beggy
so
sorting
I'm
his
just looking
next
at
one
my-
up?
No, carry on, Paul. I'm just finding my notes. Again, this will probably be for the portfolio holder, 4.2.6, about a number of affordable homes. Being on planning, I totally understand the issue with build rates, etc. But what this doesn't really give is an indication of direction of travel. So we've got a plan of target of 4, 1 delivered. We haven't got, because they're not being built, obviously that is set at 1. But what is a good indicator would be, what is the direction of travel with the permissions that we've already granted?
So just a couple of things. I appreciate the questions, but so the if you want to go into detail of the questions on the performance framework, it'd be useful to have them up front. Then we can answer your questions in the committee. We're going to have to take some of them away and give you a written answer around them. What I don't want to do in year is to rewrite the performance framework as we go. So there's moving goalposts as we move forward. However, I appreciate the comments, and they're very useful for us to review the performance framework when we move into the next performance year. Clearly, there was we've had a number of iterations of this. Members have seen them. We set the targets and ambitions at the beginning of the year with the corporate strategy, and therefore we need to follow them through. But I take on board what you're saying, and in some cases, actually, they need to be answered as part of a review of their services, like the bus service review that will come forward fairly shortly for January.
Okay, I'll just keep getting the same answer. I'll leave it there.
Well, I will add in my one that you can take away and come back with, and that's paragraph 3.7. It's highlighted the 4th bullet point. Responding to customer complaints on time has been reduced. My question isn't that is a fact. It's does this distort other factors around satisfaction rate? And has that actually been thought about? So people are, we're saying people are or are not satisfied with services, but is the dissatisfaction in part relating to not having their issue dealt with speedily? I did say you can take it away.
Yeah. From the ones that ones across my desk, yes. In part, there are one or two. Some are about not liking the decision that's been made. Some, it's actually about the interaction itself that needs to be addressed. I think in the complaints report and the summary report, we gave an overview of some of the learning from some of the complaints. I'm sure members will have read and had a look at that, which kind of gave an overview of a number of those issues that we're actually putting in performance improvement action into the organisation.
Complaints and compliments goes to audit and risk. So this committee doesn't spend a lot of time looking at it. Perhaps we should, but it does go to audit and risk. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Not a question, but clearly a comment.
Oh, yes, no, I'm not asking myself a question. What I'm just wondering, Chair, in light, obviously noting the point, it would be brilliant to have those questions, the really detailed questions ahead of time. I'm just wondering, Chair, whether it would be helpful in the future if you invited, you may all, if all of Cabinet are here, because then we should be able to sort of deal with those things. Councillor Payne and I are on the broad, are we heading in the right direction? Yes, we absolutely are, with the key big things which I mentioned in my introduction, but equally, Councillor Beggy, I appreciate that when there are smaller detail bits, it is good to have that answer and reassurance.
Thank you very much for that comment. The reason that I didn't invite all of Cabinet was that I know we are inviting them all at some point during the course of the year, and the agreement was that we would when we set up this new system. If you are offering them, I think we would be very pleased to invite them all the next time we look at this report. Thank you.
Yes, I think it would be helpful, Chair. I don't know if, obviously I have not spoken to the whole of Cabinet, and I'm sure they'll be thrilled with my volunteering.
That's your prerogative, Leader. That I think actually it's very sensible what you're saying. That would be helpful. Thank you. I have a couple of general points I would like to make while other people are thinking or looking at the clock. I would like to see some reflection in not just the reports, but the discussion amongst the leadership about what you're going to do when things aren't quite right. And recruitment was one of them. I don't think it's actually good enough to say, oh, well, it's a problem in recruiting in local government. I am well aware there is a problem. I sit on the East Midlands Council's I've forgotten what it's called, the board, employment board, that's what it's called. And it's an issue that we discuss regularly. But we also hear from councils, both in this region and outside, about some of the strategies they put in place to try and ameliorate some of their problems. And so, as it's clearly an issue, and particularly because we are small, the loss of one person can be crucial in a service area for us. I would have liked some thought about, and this clearly has been highlighted, and this is what we might do about it. So that's just an observation on that one. But similarly, we had the problems and the poor outcomes in terms of children's social care. I felt reading the report that we were looking at ticking boxes against corporate objectives, not thinking about individuals. And when you're talking about social care, whether it's children or adults, it's individuals potentially with real problems that our lack of action, for whatever reason, and it might be justified, is going to make their problems seem worse, even if it doesn't actually make them worse. So I didn't get the sense of the humanness of those poor indicators coming across. I am not for one moment suggesting that our staff aren't thinking that, because I am well aware that they are. But these are public documents, and I would like the compassion that there is in Rutland County Council to be better reflected in our public documentation. That was my general observation, but I do appreciate we're working on a new way of reporting on what is a relatively new corporate strategy. We're all learning and developing as we go along. I've got lots of little tabs here, but I think most of them have actually been.
Can I just
been
say one
covered.
thing about the individual person issue? So just on the children's social care, it's just worth reassuring. So so there was a dip in performance, which is very impersonal, isn't it? So the question has been asked and a review has been done. So are children unsafe, or were they unsafe during the period of poor performance? And the answer is no, they were not. So that's the question that we asked at the improvement board, and an audit was done. And there is an intervention at the moment in time to go over it. So I just wanted to reassure the panel, just in case it's not all just about stats. It is important that we recognise that children aren't harmed during the process.
Thank you for that. I mean, I was aware of what lay behind some of this dip in performance, and that work had been done. However, that is not reflected in the report, and that's the point I'm making. If I thought there was something really remiss about what was going on in the department, you would have heard that. Any other comments or questions? Councillor?
Sorry, it's not to the report, but would it be possible to have a 5-minute comfort break?
Of course, it would be possible to have a 5-minute comfort break. We have come to, I think we have come to the end of item 10. Before we move on to item 11, we can have a 5-minute comfort break, and I will see you at 9:10.